The wind never stopped howling in dry Cedar Ridge. It was the kind of wind that wore the skin down like sandpaper and bent fence posts over the years till they splintered. But Mary Whitlock stood straight as a pine tree against it. Even when the shutters shook on her small, aging ranch house and the livestock water troughs cracked from sun and neglect, she never flinched. She had no time to. Mary wasn't born to ranching, but she married into it. Ben Whitlock was a tall, soft-spoken man with rough hands and a tender heart. He'd brought her out to the edge of Arizona territory to chase dreams of cattle and open skies. But dreams don't hold up too well to droughts, debts, and the fever that took him 2 winters ago. Now Mary, just 33 and already a widow, was left to run the Whitlock Ranch on her own, with a 6-year-old son, Eli, and a mortgage as heavy as a storm cloud. The ranch was failing. The soil was dry and cracked, the cattle thin-ribbed and restless, and the bank agent came around more often than the preacher. Folks in town whispered that Mary should give up, sell what she had, and move in with her sister in Wichita. But Mary had buried her husband under the cottonwood tree out back, and she wasn't about to leave him behind. She woke before dawn and worked till after sundown. She taught Eli his letters at the kitchen table and fixed broken fences with calloused hands. She prayed quietly and loved fiercely, but more than anything she endured. It was all she knew how to do. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun hung low like a dying fire in the sky, Mary heard something unusual, a dragging sound, the crunch of weight on gravel just beyond her fence line. She stepped out, rifle slung, on her shoulder, cautious like any woman living alone in a land that didn't forgive mistakes. That's when she saw him, an Apache warrior, maybe 25, slumped against a rock near her fence, blood soaked through the side of his shirt. His long black hair clung to his face, and his breathing was shallow. His horse was gone. His knife was still in his belt, but he made no move for it. His eyes, dark as coal, locked with hers. Mary froze. In town, they called the Apaches savages. Said they'd gut you for a piece of bread, scalp you for stepping on their trail. But she also knew stories, quiet ones, about how some tribes were being pushed off their lands, how treaties were broken like glass, how hate traveled both ways like wildfire. The man looked ready to die. For a long second, neither moved. Then Mary's son Eli peeked out from behind the door. "Mama, what's that man doing?" Mary turned. She saw the fear in her son's eyes, and the question she couldn't answer. She walked slowly to the fence. The Apache's lips were cracked. He whispered something weakly, in a voice like broken gravel. She didn't understand the words, but she understood what he needed. Water. He was dying of thirst and blood loss, probably been out there a day or more. Mary looked back at the ranch house, the boy in the doorway, the dry fields, the emptiness that had swallowed her life whole. Then she looked again at the man. She knew what would happen if word got around that she'd helped him. White folks wouldn't like it. They might call her a traitor. But she wasn't thinking about town. She was thinking about the boy she was, raising, the man she wanted him to become. She went inside, grabbed a tin cup, filled it with what little cool water was left from the spring barrel, and walked back. She climbed the fence, knee-deep in dust and wild grass, and knelt beside the man. She lifted the cup to his lips. He drank. Not a word passed between them. Then she cleaned his wound with a cloth soaked in vinegar and spring water. She didn't ask who shot him or what he was running from. She just did what her husband would have done, what a good man would have done. When she was done, she pointed to the cottonwood tree for shade and left a slice of bread beside him before she walked away. By morning, he was gone. And so was the tin cup. Mary figured that was the end of it. She was wrong. The morning after she helped the wounded Apache, Mary went about her chores as usual. She fed the chickens, checked the cattle pen, and mended a length of sagging wire on the west fence. The sky was clear, a pale blue that looked like peace from a distance, but Mary had lived long enough to know the difference between stillness and silence. Eli asked questions over breakfast. Why was that? Man bleeding, Mama? Don't rightly know, sugar. Was he bad? Mary paused with the ladle in her hand, oatmeal steaming in the pot. I don't think anyone starts off bad, she said softly. Sometimes people get hurt, and sometimes they do the hurting. But that don't make kindness a mistake. Eli blinked slowly, trying to work it out like a puzzle. Is he gonna come back? No, she said too quickly, then quieter. I don't think so. But by mid-morning, she knew she was wrong. It started with the horses. The cattle stirred first, skittish, heads up, nostrils flaring. Then came the thunder of hooves in the distance. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a faint rhythm, like a heartbeat building in the earth. Mary looked up from the chicken coop, her breath catching. From the ridge beyond the eastern bluff, they came. 7 Apache riders, proud, silent, faces painted, spears slung on their backs, rifles holstered, but their hands never far from them. They rode with purpose, but not haste, like warriors come to deliver a message, or exact a price. Mary's blood turned cold. She stood in front of the porch, between them and the boy. Eli, she said without turning, get inside. The child obeyed without a word. She didn't reach for her rifle. She knew better than to insult men who'd already crossed that line between life and death more times than a white woman like her could understand. The lead rider, tall, proud, with a scar running down his cheek, dismounted. He didn't speak at first. He looked around the ranch slowly, the broken fencing, the weary barn, the patchy fields, the portrait of a woman who had nothing left to give and still gave it. He stepped forward. In his hand was something small, a tin cup. The such very one she'd given the wounded man the day before. He placed it gently on the porch railing. Then he looked at her, long and steady. Mary met his gaze without flinching. Her heart beat in her ears, but her voice was calm. I didn't help him to get anything back, she said. He was bleeding. He needed water. That was enough. The warrior nodded once, solemnly. Then he did something Mary would never forget. He whistled, low and sharp. And from the hills behind came 4 more riders. But these weren't warriors. These were burdened men, leading pack horses. Each horse carried supplies. Sacks of maize, dried meat, bundles of cured leather, thick wool blankets, and even fresh-cut timber logs lashed with rope. The scarred warrior gestured. A gift, a thank you, a life returned with life. Mary stared, stunned. I can't accept all that, she whispered. I didn't. I don't deserve it. The warrior finally spoke. His voice was deep, gravelly, and deliberate. Woman gave water to dying man. That makes her family, and no one lets family starve. He looked past her to the house. Your child will eat this winter. Your fences will hold. Your fire will not die. Then, as quickly as they had come, the Apache riders turned and disappeared back over the ridge, leaving the gifts behind. Mary stood there a long time, one hand on the porch post, the other on her heart. Inside, Eli pressed his face to the window. Mama, he asked, were they gonna hurt us? Mary looked back at him, tears stinging her eyes. No, baby, she whispered. They came to save us. For a few days, the ranch was quieter than usual. Mary stacked the Apache-supplied wood neatly by the barn and tucked the food away inside the root cellar. The thick wool blankets were folded with reverence, and the dried meat smoked richer than anything she'd tasted in years. Every bit of the gift was practical, the kind that showed a deep understanding of hardship. It wasn't charity, it was respect. Mutual survival. But she knew the silence wouldn't last. Out in a place like Dry Cedar Ridge, news traveled on horseback, faster than fire and twice as dangerous. And sure enough, by the end of the week, folks in town were talking. It started with Mr. Hodges, the storekeeper who sold flour and attitude in equal measure. He leaned over the counter when Mary came in for nails and lye soap. "Mary Whitlock," he said slowly, "I heard a curious thing. Heard tell there were Apaches on your land last week. 7 or 8 of them, riding in like royalty. That true?" Mary didn't flinch. She looked him square in the eye. "They weren't raiding. They were returning something that wasn't theirs to keep." He narrowed his eyes. "You giving them food?" "No," she said. "I gave a man water when he was dying." "And they came back?" "They did. You ain't scared?" "I was," she admitted, "but not of them." Hodges frowned. "You be careful, Mary. There's folks around here that wouldn't take kindly to that. Not one bit." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The following Sunday, Mary walked into the little clapboard church on Main Street, holding Eli's hand and wearing her plainest bonnet. Every head turned. Some nodded politely. Others just stared. Her friend Alma Jenkins scooted down the pew to make room for her. "I heard what you did," Alma whispered. Mary stayed quiet. "Brave," Alma said. "Foolish maybe, but brave." "I didn't do it to be brave," Mary replied. "I just didn't want a man to die thirsty on my land." After the service, the preacher approached her. He was a kindly man, round in the belly and slow with judgment. "Sister Mary," he said, "heard you showed compassion to someone who needed it." "I did," she said softly. He nodded. "Book of Matthew says, 'For I was thirsty, and you gave me drink.' You did right." That was all he said. But it was enough. Still, not everyone saw it that way. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, a group of men rode up to the ranch, 4 of them. She recognized them. Bart Finley, the blacksmith, Caleb Yorn, who used to work cattle with her late husband, and 2 ranch hands from the McKinley spread. They didn't tie off their horses. Bart spat tobacco near her gate. "You settin' up. Deals with savages now, Mary?" "I don't make deals with anyone," she said. "I gave water to a man who would have died without it. That's all." Caleb leaned forward on his saddle. "They could have killed you and that boy." "But—" "They didn't," she said. "They gave us food, blankets, timber. You think that makes it right? They've raided towns, killed settlers." Mary stepped forward. "And settlers have burned their camps, shot their women. I didn't ask about his past. I saw a man bleeding and chose not to let him die like a dog." A long pause. Bart shook his head. "You're lucky you're a widow, Mary. If Ben was still alive, this ranch would already be ashes." She stood her ground. "If Ben was still alive, he'd have done the same thing I did." They rode off without another word, but Mary knew the real trouble had only just begun. That night, she sat on the porch, watching the stars. Eli curled up on her lap, half asleep. "Mama," he mumbled, "were those men mad at you?" "A little," she whispered. "Why?" "Because sometimes people don't like when you do what's right. It makes them think too hard about what they haven't done." He was quiet for a moment. "Are the Apache gonna come back?" "I don't know," she said truthfully. Eli yawned. "I liked the one with the scar. He looked like he didn't smile much, but not 'cause he was mean, just 'cause he was tired." Mary smiled and kissed the top of his head. The boy saw more than most grown men. The summer dragged on, dry and mean. Grass died in patches, dust settled in every crack, and even the birds flew lower to the ground, conserving energy. Mary worked like she always had, maybe harder now. The supplies the Apache left were a blessing, but not a miracle. Life, still, had to be earned one sunburn and blister at a time. The whispers didn't go away. Some folks in Dry Cedar Ridge stopped speaking to Mary altogether. Others offered sympathy behind closed doors, afraid of being seen as allies to the Indian-loving widow. Her son Eli began to notice, too. At the schoolhouse, one boy called him Apache's pet. The teacher didn't stop it. Mary kept her chin up, but the strain was showing. The kindness she gave so freely was being paid back in cold shoulders and suspicion. Then came the smoke. It was Caleb Yorn's barn, set ablaze just past midnight. The fire lit up the dark sky like a beacon. Mary saw the glow from her window and saddled her horse immediately. She rode to the Yorn property with a bucket and soaked burlap, knowing she'd be met with resentment. But fire didn't wait for friendship. By the time she arrived, half the structure had collapsed. Caleb was there, shirtless, soot-covered, cursing the heavens as his brother tried in vain to beat back the flames. Mary didn't speak. She jumped from her horse and joined the line, passing water, slinging soaked cloth, doing what needed doing. Not because she owed Caleb anything, but because no one deserved to watch their livelihood burn alone. When the blaze finally gave out, near dawn, Caleb slumped against a post, defeated. Mary handed him a canteen. He didn't meet her eyes. They'll say it was Apache's. Was it? No. He took a drink. I ain't so sure of much these days. But that wasn't their style. Too far from the hills. Too close to town. Mary sat beside him. I'm sorry, he muttered. What I said back at your place. I was angry, scared. She nodded, accepting it. Anger's easy. Mercy takes more work. Caleb looked at her, a new kind of understanding in his eyes. People are gonna keep talking. But maybe talking ain't the worst thing they can do. Maybe the worst is staying quiet when good things happen and pretending it don't matter. That week, everything shifted. Mary didn't expect much to change, but it did. Alma. Jenkins came by with a jar of canned peaches and a small sack of sugar. Just things I had too much of, she claimed, but the look in her eyes said more. Reverend Martin invited Mary to speak briefly at a community circle, where she told her story plainly. She didn't embellish. She didn't defend. She just described the moment she found the wounded Apache, how he looked at her like a man too far gone to ask for help. She said the only thing she gave him was water, and that somehow that had been enough. A few heads nodded. Some didn't. But no one interrupted. Then came the next surprise. A letter arrived, not from the bank, but from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Apparently, the Apache man Mary helped was named Tohane. He was a scout, one of the few caught, between worlds, sometimes helping U.S. forces track rival tribes or bandits, sometimes trying to protect his own people from betrayal. The report claimed he'd been ambushed by deserters during a mission to guide a shipment safely through disputed territory. He barely escaped alive. They knew he'd been helped. They didn't know by whom. Somehow, he told them. And now, word had spread not just among his people, but through the officers he'd worked with. One of them had friends in Prescott, another in Santa Fe. One of them owed Tohane a life debt of his own. And just like that, folks with real influence were talking about a ranch widow near Dry Cedar Ridge who'd risked her life to help a dying man, no matter the color of his skin. Within days, another letter arrived, this one bearing the seal of the governor's office. It announced a loan forgiveness grant for struggling ranchers, offered to those who show the highest example of human dignity, regardless of risk. Mary didn't even know she'd been nominated. at the cottonwood tree. That evening, Mary walked out to the cottonwood tree where Ben was buried. She sat on the stump beside it, letting the soft, rustling leaves speak for a while. "I did what you would have done," she whispered. "But the rest of it, that was bigger than me." She looked up at the stars blinking open in the sky. "I don't know what happens next, but I reckon we're not alone out here. Not anymore." Behind her, Eli ran through the tall grass, laughing. The boy had never been lighter. The burden was lifting. Mary smiled, not because life had gotten easier, but because somehow goodness had not been wasted. It was late September when the man returned. The leaves had begun their slow shift to gold, and the wind carried the smell of earth cooling for winter. Mary was gathering firewood with Eli when she saw the figure approach from the south trail, where the hills rolled out like folded hands. He rode a chestnut horse, alone. He wore no war paint, no feathers, just a plain buckskin coat and weather-worn boots. His dark hair was tied back, and though his wound had long healed, he carried himself with the care of someone who knew what it meant to nearly die. Eli saw him first and stopped stacking logs. "Mama," he said. "It's him." Mary straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and took a deep breath. Tohain dismounted slowly, respectfully. He led his horse by the reins and stopped a few paces from the woodpile. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in soft, deliberate English, he spoke. "I came to thank you. Myself." Mary nodded, unsure what to say. "You already did," she said quietly. "You sent more than I could ever repay." He looked her in the eyes. "A man's debt is not paid in supplies. It's paid in truth." She gestured to the porch. "Would you sit a while? I have coffee." He nodded once. The porch meeting. They sat across from each other. Mary poured him a cup with her hand steady, but her heart racing. Eli sat cross-legged nearby, eyes full of curiosity. Tohain held the cup gently, almost reverently. "When you gave me water," he said, "I was ready to die. I had no strength left. My people, my family, would not have found me. I would have died on white woman's land, alone." "You weren't alone," Mary said softly. He looked at her. "No, I wasn't. I remembered your hand. Cool water, no fear." Eli piped up. "You looked scary at first, but you weren't. You were just tired." Tohain smiled, the first time Mary had seen it. It transformed his face from warrior to weary soul. "I have a son," he said. "He is your boy's age. His name is Nashoba. My wife died last winter. She was strong. Too strong to go so. Soon," Mary's voice caught. "I'm sorry." He nodded. Grief is a language we both know. They sat in quiet understanding for a while. Then Tohain reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in soft hide. He handed it to Mary. Inside was a necklace, simple but powerful. A bare tooth, polished and bound with leather, surrounded by small turquoise stones. "This is from my father," he said. "He gave it to me when I became a warrior. I give it now to you, because you have the heart of one." Mary hesitated, touched the necklace with reverence. "I don't feel like a warrior. You are. The strongest ones don't carry guns. They carry mercy." What followed changed everything. Over the next few weeks, word of Tohain's visit spread through the town. But this time, no one came with pitchforks. They came with questions, some with apologies. Even Mr. Hodges, the bitter storekeeper, left a sack of flour on her porch with a note scrawled in shaky pencil, "For the brave." Children at the school started treating Eli differently, too. It wasn't instant, but kindness is contagious. A few brave boys stood by him, and the rest followed. Then something surprising happened. Tohain returned with Neshoba. The boy was quiet, with deep eyes and long legs. He and Eli stared at each other for a while, neither sure what to do. Then, without a word, they ran off into the pasture with a stick and a rock and started a game only boys understand. Mary and Tohain watched them from the porch. "We've both lost," Mary said, "and somehow gained." He nodded. "Our sons won't. Grow up thinking kindness is weakness. That's enough." In the months that followed, the two families began to trade. Not formally, not in contracts or coin, but in mutual trust. Mary taught Neshoba to read. Tohain showed Eli how to track animals and recognize herbs. The bond grew, unnoticed by outsiders, but unbreakable. A final reckoning. One day, the sheriff of Dry Cedar Ridge rode out to Mary's ranch. He was a fair man, but weary of trouble. He pulled his hat off and looked around the neat, well-kept land. "Heard tell you're working with the Apache scout," he said carefully. "I'm working with a man who helped feed my son," Mary said. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Town council ain't sure what to make of it." "Maybe they don't need to make anything of it," she said. "Maybe they can just let people live." The sheriff looked around again. "This land's better off than most. And so's the boy. That means something." He tipped his hat. "You keep doing what you're doing. That's all I came to say." Legacy in the dust. Years later, the story became legend. The widow who helped a dying Apache and nearly lost everything, only to gain a family, a future, and a town's uneasy respect. Mary's ranch became a quiet sanctuary, where lines of race and fear blurred in the dust of common ground. Eli and Neshoba grew up together. They fought like brothers and loved like kin. When they built homes of their own, they did it side by side. And every year, on the first cold morning of fall, Mary wore the necklace Tohain gave her, the bear tooth that reminded her of what real strength looked like. Not loud, not proud, but kind.